Hello, and welcome to Cheers to Fears, where we take horror films and turn them into drinking games. We're your two hosts. I'm Tucker.
And I'm Alex. Today we will be making a drinking game for Paranormal Activity 6, The Ghost Dimension, directed by Gregory Plotkin. Plotkin was an editor for movies 2 to 5 in the series, and was also an editor for Get Out. Another movie he directed was Hellfest, which I think is a fairly underrated horror movie. Paranormal Activity 6 apparently required 5 different writers, including Jason Pagan, Andrew Deutschman, Gavin Heffernan, Brantley O'Fil, and most notably, Adam Robitil, who directed other movies such as Insidious: The Last Key and the Escape Room franchise thus far.
The Ghost Dimension follows Leela, the daughter of Ryan and Emily, as well as Uncle Mike and Skylar. We don't really know what relation she shares, and it's never explained throughout the movie. They move into a house that is on the same plot of land that Christy and Katie's family home was on, and Ryan and his brother Mike find Dennis's old tapes. The two of them start to watch the tapes and find out that their main target is Ryan's daughter, Leela.
This movie will have spoilers in it for the entire franchise, so be warned. If you do not want this movie spoiled, we will be posting the drinking rules on the screen now, and we will invite you to come back after you are done with them. With that out of the way, let's continue.
So as usual, our first rule is death, and this time around it came to 5 sips.
I guess the only notable one is there was a hand that burst through, I think it was Ryan's chest, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
I feel like if it was done practically, it would have been a lot better, but it was done CG and it looked kind of poor, especially with how bad the lighting was. You couldn't really see it in all its glory. So let's move on to the next rule, which is whenever you hear somebody scream, cry, or yell, you take a sip, and that came to a total of 13 sips.
I was screaming because you screamed.
You screamed so loud.
You shouted near your sleeping daughter's face, so I screamed. I couldn't see anything.
Yeah, as usual, not much else to say for it, so we'll move on to rule number 3, which again is whenever you see a jump scare occur. And this happened also 13 times.
So I feel like none were really that effective in this movie. Your opinion?
Yeah, like, there was one in particular that caught me off guard, to be honest. I don't even remember the scene, but I remember it was a jump scare, and then immediately after, like the scene cut, and then it went to them rewatching the tape, and it just freeze framed on the entity or whatever, and it just looked so cheesy, and it just ruined everything for me. And that's something they did throughout the movie was they had a jump scare, whether it was good or not, whatever, it doesn't matter. But then the next scene immediately they just like ruined it by showing exactly what the creature looked like, and it just looked awful.
Moving on to rule number 4 is whenever paranormal activity occurs, you take a sip, and that came to a total of 13 sips yet again.
Yeah, third rule in a row with 13. And this rule is just like the rest of the movies that we looked at already. Like anything that's just a small bump in the night that happens, lights flicker, whatever, doors shut,
yeah,
all that typical stuff you see. This one has quite a bit of very in-your-face stuff, though. It's not very subtle, so it's not hard to catch it, I guess.
Yeah.
Anyways, moving on to rule number 5, it's whenever a camera is mentioned, and this time around it happened 7 times.
Honestly, the camera that they used in this movie I hated.
Well, it doesn't really make sense, like, with the storyline that they've previously presented to us. Like, it was Dennis's camera from the 80s. Why wasn't he using it back then if it existed, like, to see the ghosts rather than just the paranormal stuff that was going around?
Also, especially that they try to make a lot of this realistic. Like, the whole franchise, it was based on, like, they try to make it like a true story, kind of like the Blair Witch.
Something that's a little bit more believable, yeah.
Yeah, and then they throw random shit like this in it, which is completely unbelievable. Moving on to rule number 6, whenever you see a night number, you take a sip. And that came to a total of 5 sips.
Yeah, and one thing to point out that kind of pissed us off was the very first night when all the cameras were set up, everything was like ready to go and capture everything. They didn't show a night number, they just showed the date. But then when the second night rolled around, then they said night number 1. Yeah. So like it was like, oh, you just skipped the first day. I don't know what that was all about, but it was just a minor nitpick, I guess.
Oh yeah.
Moving on to rule number 7, it's whenever the camera picks up the particles from the ghosts, and this happened 11 times.
Yeah, I guess it is worth clarifying that Toby technically is a ghost particle thing, so we added him for this as well.
Yeah,
so,
it's not just when the particles are floating in the frame, it's also when you see him in his form, I guess. Also,
a problem with this is you really didn't get to see it in its true glory because it takes place in an 80s camera. And it was a new gimmick that they tried to add, like Paranormal Activity 4. I didn't like the Xbox Kinect by any means, but I feel like this was a lot worse.
Yeah, like, honestly, for me in the beginning, from an effects standpoint, I was kind of intrigued by the camera picking up the particles and stuff. But as soon as they started seeing or showing him in his full form, I absolutely hated it, and I wish they would have just kept it ominous with the particles or whatever.
Moving on to rule number 8 is whenever you see old tapes playing, you take a sip. That came to a total of 10 sips.
Yeah, and they were all the tapes of Katie and Christy as kids, or like even footage that we haven't seen in any of the other movies when they're slightly older but still kids. Anyways, moving on to rule number 9, it's whenever one of the little girls uses a supernatural ability, and this came out to 8 drinks in total. Just to clarify, this can include Katie, Christy, or Leela.
Yeah, generally when this happens, it's either one of them seeing into the future, or it could also be the fact that Leela sees ghosts. Just her seeing ghosts would be a supernatural ability.
Yeah.
Now on to the final rule, which is whenever you see the symbol, you take a sip. This came to a total of 7 sips throughout the movie.
Yeah, not much to say on this rule. Like, we've seen this symbol in many other movies before. I don't think we actually made it a rule until the previous installment, but now it's again a rule. And the one thing I wanted to point out about this rule is in Leela's room, she had like a tent, or I don't know if it was a teepee or just a kid's tent, whatever it was, but the way that it was set up, it kind of looked like it was the symbol. It just was a triangle, and then it had like circle windows right in the center of the tent or whatever. And I thought that was kind of neat, and I think we actually included it just as one drink for this rule, because it is pretty obscure, and you know, you wouldn't be looking at that every time for a drink.
Yeah, I feel like they did that intentionally when they made the tent as a part of the prompt.
Yeah, that's what I think too. And that wraps up all the rules for this drinking game. The total number of sips we had this time around was 92, which is the equivalent of drinking about 3 standard 12-ounce cans based on our 30 sip per can scale.
All I can say is I kind of wish that it was more. I didn't enjoy the movie too much.
No, there wasn't any part that was particularly hard. The final scene, I guess, it kind of got chaotic and there was a little bit more drinking going on, but aside from that, it was pretty straightforward, decently paced. I agree, I would have liked to see a little bit more drinking in it, but it was okay.
Yeah, so even counting the rules for this movie, I feel like about 20 minutes through, rather, I had to try to stop myself from just constantly trying to check out of the movie.
Yeah, I didn't think it was the best Paranormal Activity movie either. Like, it was bottom of the list for sure. I don't know if I'd rank it very last in the franchise. I didn't like the movie, but there was things that I found somewhat entertaining, at least, to keep me engaged. It's not a movie I'm going to go back and watch, but I can see why people would think it is the worst movie in the franchise for sure. And I guess another point about this movie that I wasn't a big fan of was the cameras. They were even worse quality than like the third movie when it was supposed to replicate the 80s. I know they were using the camera from the 80s, but it looked even worse than that one. Like, the third one didn't look bad. It was still high quality. It just looked like it had a filter over it or whatever. But this one had like a crazier filter, and it just made it look awful. It was kind of distracting at times, I think.
Yeah.
Like, there's ways to make modern film look old while still having good quality.
Yeah.
And they pulled it off in the third one, for example. So, like, yeah, exactly. It's just, what's the point of making it look shitty when there's ways to do it right, you know?
Yeah. So as you mentioned before, Skylar didn't belong in the movie whatsoever. First of all, who was she?
I don't know.
She was mentioned as Auntie Skylar once, but it wasn't ever like brought up that she was actually an auntie or something like that.
Yeah, and if she was, like, was it Ryan's sister or was it Emily's sister? Like, I don't know. We don't know anything about her.
So my theory is it would have been Emily's sister, and the reason that I say that is because earlier on in the movie, I think Emily complains to Ryan saying, hey, why are you letting your brother stay here for 2 weeks or something along those lines. But again, I would have also felt that was hypocritical if they did say that.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, I don't know. You can really, it's up in the air. I guess it's left up to interpretation, a whole character who she is.
A whole character is left up to interpretation. Exactly. And the whole character isn't even important throughout the entire plot.
Oh, no.
If you remove this character from the movie, it wouldn't have made a difference.
Well, exactly, yeah. The only scene where she had any significance was when the whatever was coming out of her mouth in the very end. But even that, it's like, that could happen to anybody.
Yeah, Toby could have done that.
Yeah.
Literally, the little girl could have done that. Anybody could have done
exactly.
that. Didn't have to be her.
Yeah. And I guess just talking about things that didn't make sense or we didn't like about the movie or whatever you want to call it is the Santa suit. So it was set up in the beginning about the Santa suit, and then it just had a terrible payoff where it was standing in the bedroom doorway.
Yeah.
And then, he sees, it was Ryan that saw it, right?
I think it was Ryan. It was either Ryan or Mike, but I think it was Ryan.
Yeah, either way, one of them saw it, and then Emily comes to see what's going on, and then it's just not there. She can't see it, but only the guy can, and that was it. There wasn't anything to come from it. And
I didn't really expect this from a Paranormal Activity movie, considering the entity itself possesses people as opposed to like objects. I would expect this from like an Annabelle movie, but I wouldn't expect this from a Paranormal Activity movie. So it just feels pointless
and out of place.
And very out of place. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah. So I know we already talked about Skylar and how she was just a pointless character, didn't belong there. But I feel like none of the characters were very likable, or like, you didn't care about any of the characters.
Mm-hmm.
Even the little girl, like, she was kind of bland too. Like, I didn't really care if she died. Like, I don't know.
I didn't care if she died either. She was kind of a brat.
Yeah, I wasn't attached to anybody in the film. So like, that just points against this film again, where they didn't have any good character development. And that was the same as Paranormal Activity 4 too, which all the characters were bland, but I don't know, something different about this one. At least Paranormal Activity 4, every character like kind of filled a role and had somewhat of a purpose, like being the father or daughter, whatever.
Or being the little kid like Hunter, and being the little kid that tries to manipulate him. Like, that kind of had a purpose, but in this movie, I don't think that was the case.
Well, especially with Skylar being there. Like, there's characters that didn't have a purpose, so that was a problem, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So I know Tucker and I have been actually arguing about this a little bit. There's one other point in the movie where they say June 6, 2005, not 2006, but 2005 is 666.
Your daughter was born on June 6th, 2005, right? 6th day of the 6th month of the 6th year, 2005, 666.
And I hate how stupid that is, because you could have just made it 2006 and there'd be sixes in it.
Yeah, well, there would be a 6 in it, and I get your point. But I can't say that they fucked it up, because 2005, if you count 2000 as the first year, 2005 would be the 6th year. And just like if you were born on year 2000, in 2005 you would be 6 years old. So it makes sense to me why they would call it 666 and put 2005. I get why you would say 2006, because it's the number 6, but I also get why they put 2005.
I still feel like this is just put in there to be like, oh, see, it's technically 6. But honestly, if you put the 6 in there, it would have had less implications. Nobody would have questioned 2006 being there for 666.
That might have been
People
why
wouldn't have said like, oh, 2006 is 667. Nobody would have said that.
Well, that might be why they included it this way too, to get people talking. I bet you they had this argument in the writing room too.
There's no way.
Yes.
There's 5 writers, but honestly, I don't think that like any of them were on the same page throughout the entire movie.
I mean, you might be right about that, but it was a conversation, I guarantee it. So I feel like I don't even need to ask, but I'm going to anyways. What were your overall thoughts on this movie?
My thoughts were, it's like they tried to copy a Paranormal Activity movie, but instead of like looking at 1, 2, or 3, like one of the good ones, they looked at 4, and they made that one worse. Which is saying a lot, because I wasn't the biggest fan of Paranormal Activity 4, so I really don't know what their intentions were for this one, considering how they tried to make a bad movie worse.
Yeah, that's fair. I might not 100% agree with that. Like, this one I felt more entertained watching than Paranormal Activity 4, because Paranormal Activity 4 I just felt was boring. This one, like, there were so many problems with it, of course, like we pointed out, with all the bland characters. Skylar was, who the hell was she? The CGI, all of that. It was all problems, but it was at least a little bit more entertaining, and maybe I thought it was entertaining because of how ridiculous it was. But yeah, I wasn't as bored as I have been with like Paranormal Activity 4, for example. But that being said, I'm never going to watch this movie again, and I didn't like it, so take it with a grain of salt, I guess.
And I guess with all that being said, let's move on to the award ceremony, where we award one not-so-lucky nominee the Darwin Award. This goes out to a character who made a stupid decision that resulted in them getting killed, somebody else getting killed, or simply resulting in something bad happening that could have been easily avoided. This award can also be given out to a character that is just plain dumb. Here are the nominees.
Today's first nominee is Skylar, for just kind of being there and not leaving at any time.
Next, we have Emily for arguing with Ryan on why his brother is over, after a breakup during the holiday season, while Skylar is just kind of freeloading there.
The final nominee today is Mike, for not leaving the family to deal with the problem on their own. The family went to a hotel despite him coming to visit them. It would have been the perfect time for him to leave given the circumstances.
And the winner is Mike. He decided to stick with the family even though it was pretty clear that his safety was not guaranteed.
And with all that being said, we hope you enjoyed our look into Paranormal Activity 6, The Ghost Dimension. If you end up playing the game alongside the movie, or if you have any other feedback or suggestions, let us know in the comments below. Also let us know in the comments what was the thing that threw you off the most about this film.
Make sure to like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next episode, where we will be wrapping up the Paranormal Activity franchise with Paranormal Activity Next of Kin. If you want to check out our most recent video on Paranormal Activity 5, click on the box on the top right, or if you want to see a playlist of all the drinking games and horror movies we review, click on the box below it. Thanks for tuning in, and this is us saying, cheers to fears.